Hello, everybody. It's our absolute pleasure to be speaking with you today at the Innovations in Internationalisation at Home conference. We would like to talk about our University Global Partnership Network Academy that we set up at the beginning of the pandemic. My name is Alex Seal. I'm an Associate Dean International at the University of Surrey, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Hi everybody, my name is Nayiri Keshishi and I'm a Teaching Fellow in Learning Development at the University of Surrey.
Thank you, Nayiri. What we'd like to do today is talk about a COIL project that we set up right at the beginning of the pandemic, because we felt that there was a real opportunity for students to have a different form of international experience that they were accustomed to at the University of Surrey pre-pandemic. COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning, wasn't something that was widely done at our institution. And whilst we didn't have any experts in it, Nayiri and I felt that we just wanted to jump 2 feet into this, to do this, not just for the students, but actually to see the opportunities that we could develop amongst staff as well. Let me just introduce our team a little bit and tell you about what the University Global Partnership Network is. So the UGPN, University Global Partnership Network, is a consortium of 4 different universities that we have a partnership with together. That's ourselves at the University of Surrey, North Carolina State University in the US, the University of Wollongong in Australia, and the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And the UGPN was set up back in 2012 as a way to foster research between these 4 institutions. But we felt a pressing need that the pandemic allowed us to connect education around the partnership in a really sustainable way, and we'll talk about this aspect of sustainability a little bit later on. So our team was not just Nayiri and myself. We actually had staff and faculty members from all across the UGPN that wanted to join this COIL project, and you can just see the wealth of backgrounds. And this is something that we really enjoyed, that we were working with people outside of our own disciplinary backgrounds, but with this view to connect students through the COIL project. So we've got such a diverse mix of faculty members all across the 4 UGPN partners who were all jumping onto this COIL project that we were creating. So I think it would be good to start with just a bit of context and background for the pilot UGPN, University Global Partnership Network, for the Academy of Students, the COIL project that we ran in 2021. So one of the overall themes was that we wanted to rethink the internationalization of universities and the development of research-focused partnerships. The UGPN, the 4 institutions within the UGPN, have done a fantastic job in fostering and developing new research collaborations with the seed funding grants that we put throughout the UGPN. Researchers can bid together in order to use this as seed funding to go off for larger external bids. But where we have this research-focused partnership and the students can physically travel around to these different partners, we really felt this deep need for students to have something more, to have students to be able to be bridged into the UGPN in a much more fluid way than resting on the physical mobility. So this is where we were really thinking about, we've got this great research, this research partnership going on, but how can we create opportunities for students? And this is what led people like Nayiri and myself towards collaborative online international learning. So there was a real opportunity to develop the educational pillar of the University Global Partnership Network. And we saw the pandemic as a timely opportunity to really develop this educational pillar of the existing relationship that we had within the network. But as part of this, we also were really starting to rethink the concept of mobility. We know that when we're looking at physical student mobility, there's often challenges and barriers. It's largely white, able-bodied, affluent background, affluent students that undertake physical mobility opportunities. And we know that from the wealth of literature out there in looking at who goes abroad, particularly in the UK context. So we thought that actually creating this COIL project within the UGPN provided a real opportunity to democratize opportunities for having an international experience. There was no cost in the sense of physical travel attached to it. There was a smaller degree of risk in students from widening participation backgrounds, for example, often having to leave family or caregiving responsibilities that they have. So we saw that this was a lot lower risk in terms of the students that would sign up. And in that respect, we very much saw this as a widening participation opportunity in international opportunities for our students. And of course, COIL and internationalisation at home are not new. Of course, we know, don't we, that it's been around for quite a long time. But the pandemic did require us to think about their value and purpose in new ways. And I think for us, this was a big part in thinking, what is the contemporary experience of a student that's living in a time where we largely can't comprehend? This is one in a multi-generational event, the pandemic. What is the student experience at the beginning of the pandemic? We didn't know, but we knew that internationalization at home was being redeveloped in light of what was happening within the pandemic. So in this sense, we very much saw internationalization at home, as Beeland and Jones talk about here, as the purposeful integration of international and intercultural dimensions into the formal and informal curriculum for all students within domestic learning environments. So we had our students within their domestic learning environments, and definitely in the case of the UK, and I think in the context of North America at the time, were in full lockdown conditions. And we wanted to create this informal curriculum in which students within their domestic settings, and often their dorms and their bedrooms because of the lockdowns, could all be joined together. And this is what we sought off to go and do. Nayiri, over to you.
So we had different motivations and aspirations for this project, and Alex has alluded to some of those already. But there were 4 key things that we were united in. So the first thing was exploring the experience of contemporary HE within the global pandemic. So what was the student experience and what did it look like during this time? The second one was creating a more equitable experience of internationalization. So making sure that a wide demographic of students were able to participate in internationalization opportunities. We also wanted to demonstrate that learning is more than a formal curriculum. So often within higher education, particularly within a UK context, the curriculum and learning, there's always a specific outcome, whether that's assessment or grades. But we want to demonstrate that learning is much more than that. And our pre and post survey that we conducted as part of this project, which we'll talk more about later, was a way for us to capture some of the learning that students experienced, where there was no real formal outputs, and it was very much a co-curricular activity that didn't count towards their grades, but there was a lot of learning that did take place through students participating in this experience. And finally, we wanted to develop our connections. So as teaching practitioners who were interested within international, within the area of international education, and obviously we have our own research and subject interests as well, it was a really great opportunity for us to connect with colleagues as part of this existing network. In terms of what we did, we had 55 students that were represented across the 4 partner institutions, 10 members of staff and teaching assistants, and you saw the list of colleagues at the start. And we worked on this project over the duration of 6 weeks. So the students were put into groups with an equal representation from each partner university, and they were working on a group presentation and poster on a topic that was related to the pandemic. So we had topics such as public health, media, government, and student experience. And we wanted the students to reflect on each of their individual experiences within their within their home countries, and to talk about those experiences and share those experiences within the presentations and the posters that we asked them to create. We wanted to give the students flexibility, so it was up to them which topic they chose, so whether that was government, public health, student experience, and it was a really great chance for them to share their experiences during the pandemic, talk about things that were similar, talk about things that were different. So that gives you a general idea as to what the project was and what we were asking the students to work on. So if we go to the next slide.
Our platforms for collaboration in the pilot project, we actually used 3, and we strategically chose 3 different platforms for the students to work on together, because we thought that each of them would allow for different things. For example, we use Zoom, inevitably, as everybody did during the pandemic, for the live sessions taking place between students. So when we were having interactions between staff, faculty and students talking with students about their projects, that was being used primarily, or Zoom was being used primarily for those activities. However, what we also did was use Google Drive, because we almost used this as a repository of information, so that students could be, if they were looking at public health responses to the pandemic, for example, a student in Brazil could be bringing in policy documents and putting them in the Google Drive, and a Surrey or Wollongong or NC State student could be looking at, oh, actually, this is the context of what's happening in Brazil at the moment. Well, actually, let me bring in what's happening from the UK. So it built up this repository of information which the students could look at and use and draw on in crafting their presentations and their videos, or their posters, sorry. But for me, and I don't know, it's been quite interesting, Nayiri, when we talk about this in a moment together, I think my favorite platform that we used was Slack. And the reason why I say that is because Slack offered this lifetime interactive aspect to the COIL project that I just hadn't really considered beforehand. So just to give you some examples here, we use Slack. And for those of you that are unfamiliar about it, we're more than happy when we have the live session to talk further about this. It's almost like, I was very unfamiliar with this before until our colleague at Wollongong introduced this in. It's almost like having your own Facebook that's closed off to the wider world, and it's just UGPN Academy within this. So Slack offered this ability for students to come online, see of their friends who was online at that time. They could post pictures around what they'd been doing at the weekend. The Australian students, for example, didn't have any form of lockdown at this point in the pandemic, and they were kind of out wandering. For those of us that were in full lockdowns, and we were in the UK only allowed out for a short walk or a run each day, for example, we'd post pictures here. But Nayiri, I think one of the great things I liked was that the students sort of kicked off what discussions they actually wanted. And if you look on the left here, you know, somebody said, oh, can we have a Netflix and Amazon Prime recommendations? And the students could start recommending. And the reason why I like this so much is because it was organic, and it allowed the students away from the sort of, it almost felt like Zoom was the formal collaboration, and this was the real organic activity taking on. Nayiri, did you like Slack as much? I mean, I loved it, but did you like it as much?
Yeah, it was great. I think this was the platform where we really saw those students that were participating developing relationships with their peers, and talking about a variety of different topics that weren't related to the project at all. But at the same time, they were able to share their experiences. They were able to talk about hobbies, things that they were enjoying on TV. And this was a real benefit, I think, from the project. And we saw that in some of the qualitative feedback that we received from the students, is that they really enjoyed interacting with their peers and getting that social interaction that was really lacking for most of them during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's just 2 examples of some of the students' posters that they'd created within their groups. So you've got a group on the left here that looked at the government and COVID-19. The group on the right here decided to look at mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were kind of blown away because a lot of these students were, many of them were first year students, sometimes foundation level students. And I thought the quality of the posters was fantastic. You know, they collaborated so well. And that was just such an amazing thing to see. And then, of course, you had that formal aspect, like Nayiri and I were just talking about. Behind that, you had the Slack activity going on. And it gave it that sense of community, I think, between all of it. It was fantastic to watch. Nayiri, do you want to talk a little bit about the findings that we did from creating a bit of research around this?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we carried out a pre-participation and a post-participation survey. And of course, we can talk in a bit more detail about this later. But here are some of our key findings. So when looking at some of that informal learning that we mentioned earlier, a lot of that was taking place. And based on the results from the pre and the post survey, we found that these are some of the key things that students valued. So they really valued developing their use of online technologies. So we had a 16% increase from the pre-survey, either agreeing or strongly agreeing that their involvement in the UGPN Academy had developed their use of online technologies. They also really valued their social connection, networking and learning about diverse experiences of both students and staff members that were participating in the project. So 96% reported that they had enjoyed learning about the experiences of students in other countries, and 79% perceived that networking with students and faculty members from other educational institutions was useful. We also saw this openness to international careers and international opportunities. So by the end of the project, 68% of students who had participated, an increase of 56% from the pre-survey, reported to be considering a career that would allow them to travel internationally. So we saw this change in perception as to what their future might look like in terms of careers, opportunities abroad, etc. So again, that was very positive for us to see.
Absolutely, thanks, Nayiri. So just lastly, what we'd like to just run through is we actually ran the project again this year in 2022, and although we've talked, by and large about what we did in the pilot project, I think there's just a few things that we can skim over in setting up for the discussion that we're going to have when it comes to the live session. So one of the things that we learned was that there are inevitably language barriers, and actually what happened in the first live sessions when we had all 4 partners there was that sometimes when Sao Paulo students and staff would start speaking in the live sessions, they'd naturally go into Portuguese. And that was fantastic to see. And the staff would sometimes translate back. So what we did this time is that we specifically made sure that the academy was bilingual. And I think one of the nice things is that we said to students, okay, if on Slack, for example, if the Sao Paulo students are writing in their native Portuguese, take that. We can use Google Translate. It might not be a perfect translation, but it allows you to converse. And I think that was a really good, really valuable skill for many of our students, that it can be difficult with language barriers, but it's never impossible. And actually we embraced that this year, and I absolutely love that aspect of it. We also did more formal scheduling of the meetings by staff faculty. We definitely learned, as first timers of COIL, we definitely learned in 2021 that you really have that staff and faculty have to control the rudder of the ship. And I think, having that saying, okay, to the students, this is when very early on, this is when you'll meet, this is when you should be meeting, actually pays dividends in the long run. That students, once they're forced to meet a little bit at the beginning, suddenly they start to do that more naturally. And we definitely learned that the hard way right at the beginning of 21. And this year it was fantastic. And also just having those prompts, I think, to foster, engagement on Slack, for example. We left in 2021, we left Slack just for, it will all take off and the students will just, spontaneously start posting here, there and everywhere. Well, they didn't. But when we as staff kind of started prompting that and discussing things ourselves, suddenly the students started to follow as well. And I think definitely that second year, we learned that it's very much about staff just exercising that control of the rudder. And one at the early stages, and then suddenly the students actually take control and steer the ship in the way in which they want to. And that's always, for me, that's the best part of the COIL project. Nayiri, do you want to talk about what we changed a little bit?
Yeah, so just to finish off, we did change a few things, some of it based on student feedback and some based on what we felt might work better for the project as staff members. We changed the output, if you like. As we have mentioned before, the output wasn't the most important thing for us. However, we felt that going from a poster to a video presentation would provide the students with more flexibility and more opportunities to represent their different skill sets. So we changed that. We had a different topic, so we felt it was time to perhaps refocus our attentions away from the pandemic, and we looked at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that was an interesting switch for us, and provided flexibility in terms of student interests, their subject backgrounds. But again, we could talk a bit more about why we made that choice. We also consolidated the online platforms. So we carried on using Zoom for the live online events, and we continued using Slack as well to communicate with the students and to help them build their relationships. We didn't use Google Drive, but what we found is that students were then setting up their own platforms to share their work, and a lot of the time that was Google Drive. But we felt that was a positive thing to do, just to consolidate things and keep it more simple. Following on from that theme, we condensed the time frame. So rather than students working across a period of 6 weeks, we condensed it down to 3 weeks. And this was due to a variety of different reasons, part of which was semester timetables and making sure that the project was aligned with the timetables of the different institutions, making sure that students could fully participate together for the duration of the project. So those are just a few changes. We've still got more ideas for the next iteration of this project as well, again, based on student feedback and how we feel things might work better as staff members. But I think the key thing when thinking about COIL is ensuring that you remain flexible, you reflect on the experiences, and always think about what you can change, what you can tweak to ensure that the student experience is as good as it can be. So just to end for today, we'd like to thank you very much for watching our presentation, and we really look forward to discussing it with you at the conference.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.